for our SENEDIA Virtual Tech Talk. I'm Molly Magee. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of SENEDIA. I'm also the CEO for the Undersea Technology Innovation Consortium, and we have many of our member companies from both organizations on the call. I am really excited today for this tech talk with the Canadian Commercial Corporation, highlighting the opportunity to partner. As noted on the slides, just a few housekeeping things, and thank you all for already following them. We're asking that, because we have so many people, everybody to stay muted and to stay with your camera off so we won't have any interference that way. Just for information, I am recording this, and for the first time, I'm trying the transcription function, so we will see how that goes. I will send out notes, and I will also share the presentations that you see after the fact. I have been focusing a lot recently on the importance of technology intersections, and this is definitely a great way to have a tech talk that talks about the intersection between the US and Canada and how we can partner. We've got 3 distinguished Canadian officials with us today to get a broad perspective. We will start out with Erin Donahue, the Trade Commissioner for Defense and Ocean Technologies for the Canadian Consulate General of Boston. We will then hear from David Margolis, the Commercial Attaché for Aerospace and Defence for the Quebec Government in New York. And then our main speaker will be Suzanne Wilkinson, the Canadian Commercial Corporation Director for U.S. Operations. I will now turn it over to Erin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you for hosting us. SENEDIA has been a great partner over the years and really look forward to furthering potential collaboration. With that, everyone still seeing my slides okay? Perfect. So it's really my job this morning to set the table for a few other speakers, but just want to introduce myself. I am, as Molly mentioned, Erin Donahue. I'm a trade commissioner based here at the Canadian Consulate in Boston. And to give you a sense of what we do, my office is part of the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. We're in embassies and consulates throughout the world. We really have a dual role. One is to help Canadian companies as they look to further their international business development efforts around the world. But we also work with international companies and US companies more specifically in a couple of different ways. One is that we help companies buy from Canada. If you're looking for supply chain partners, that's absolutely something we can assist with. Often the first interaction we have with defense companies is either when they're preparing a bid for a Canadian defense contract or they've won a bid and they're looking to fill offset or what Canada calls ITB requirements. And that's something where we can help and connect you with other government partners and industry. We also help companies invest in Canada. So if you're, for example, working with a Canadian partner and decide you need boots on the ground and you need to open an office, we can help walk you through how you would do that, how you register in Canada, can connect you with provincial and municipal folks, universities, others that can help you with labor, tax, and generally even site selection questions. And finally, we help you innovate with Canada. So if you're looking to do R&D with Canadian partners, we can help make referrals and suggestions of places to go and connect. You will notice one of the things that we don't mention here is helping companies sell into Canada. I believe on the line today, and I didn't see her name, but if she's here, hopefully she'll drop her info in the chat, is Melissa Grosso with the U.S. Commercial Service. U.S. Commercial Service is my U.S. counterpart, and they are great at helping U.S. companies when they're looking to expand their business internationally. We trade information quite a bit, and I do talk with my colleagues or my counterparts up at the U.S. Embassy in Canada, but they're a great first point of contact if you have questions about doing business in Canada. Very briefly, I definitely want you to hear more from Suzanne, but just to set the table a little bit, Canadian defense industry is fairly active. It's a $12 billion industry, very R&D focused, much more so than the manufacturing sector writ large in Canada. And it is important to note that they don't just support the domestic Canadian defense industry, we support allied partners around the globe. This is just intended to give you a brief snapshot of where some of the centers of excellence are. I won't talk much about Quebec because I'll leave that to David in just a moment. But as you can see, in Ontario, strong capabilities in things like combat vehicle manufacturing, weapons and sensor systems, as well as aircraft manufacturing. And then on both coasts, you're going to note strong capabilities in the naval defense space. That is in part because of Canada's national shipbuilding strategy. This has been ongoing for about a decade now in Canada, and it's a commitment from the Canadian government to recapitalize their fleet. And that's for both combat and non-combat vessels. So it's for the Royal Canadian Navy, the Coast Guard, and Transport Canada. Just to give you a sense of where some of this activity is taking place, this is a summary of some of the large vessel projects that are going on, and this does include both shipbuilding and technologies that will outfit those ships. So you'll see Irving Shipbuilding in Halifax doing some of the combat vessel work, Seaspan out of Vancouver doing work on non-combat vessels for both the Coast Guard and the Navy, and then Chantier Davy in Quebec, which is doing work for the Canadian Coast Guard. I won't mention yet, but I'll let my colleague David mention as well that Canada recently announced that their intent to buy 12 Arctic Patrol submarines. So I know a lot of SENEDIA members are active in the marine defense space. There is a lot of work being done, and that will continue to be done in Canada in this area. Also, just wanted to highlight some recent news. I know a number of you are familiar with NATO DIANA, that's Defense Innovation Acceleration North America. They recently opened their North American headquarters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And if you're not familiar with NATO DIANA, it's really intended to accelerate the use of dual-use technologies into the hands of the warfighter. So here in New England, I know that Mass Challenge and MIT are doing a lot of work in this space. Up in Canada, in addition to having their headquarters based in Halifax, they also recently named an acceleration partner, COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship. Frequent visitors to the Rhode Island area, doing a lot of work with the marine industry here in New England. They've been named an acceleration partner that will work with NATO DIANA and industry on this acceleration program. Similarly, out of Waterloo, Ontario, Communitech is the other innovation partner that will be working on some of their acceleration programs in Canada. More broadly, and I believe Molly will be sending this out to all of you, there's a full list of test centers that are partnering with NATO DIANA, and these can be used not just by Canadian companies, but also US companies that are looking to find test beds for their technologies. And finally, just wanted to highlight a couple of ways to connect with Canadian industry. The Canadian National Defence Association is called CADSE, the Canadian Association of Defence and Security Industries. They have their upcoming conference this May in Ottawa. That conference is usually closed to members only, but there are some ways that international companies can participate. And if you want to learn more, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me. The other event that I wanted to highlight is DefSec. It just wrapped up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but it is Atlantic Canada's defense and security event every year. And I know a number of SENEDIA members mentioned to me when I was at Defense Innovation Days that they plan to attend. That event is a little bit more naval focused, just being based in Halifax. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. So next up, you'll be hearing from David Margolis, Sylvestre, who is with our Quebec Consulate, Quebec delegation in New York. David?
Thank you, Erin. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Does everyone see the presentation? Okay, great. So I'm a partner and work very closely with Erin in helping supporting trade and investment, specifically in the province of Quebec. I'm the commercial attaché focused on aerospace and defense out of the Quebec Government Office of New York. There are 6 government offices throughout the United States, and all of us are here to help work with U.S. and aerospace and defense companies and helping offer solutions when it comes to supply chain challenges that they may have and connecting them with Quebec companies that can offer some solutions. So let's see. So the Quebec aerospace and defense ecosystem, it is the 3rd largest in the world, thanks to the historical presence of Bombardier. And here you're going to find over 5 primes, 15 OEMs, 230 plus suppliers, and it's supported by 41,000 individuals that have that expertise within the aerospace and ecosystem, within the aerospace and defense ecosystem. I just got a note that that there was a loss of my screen. Just want to make sure that.
Yeah, David, we're not seeing your slides.
Okay. How is this? Do you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So just to point out, the strong ecosystem is here with thanks to the strong presence of all these different companies. Just to give you a sense of who exactly the key players are in terms of the primes, we have Boeing, Airbus, Bell, Bombardier, CAE, and Pratt, and these are some of the key OEMs that are supporting them. The key message is that it's one of the few locations in the world where you can construct an airplane from A to Z. Just this next slide here will give you an idea of all the different components that the companies in Quebec have expertise in terms of building, whether it's the manufacturing pre-assembly, the assembly, the finishing, and the post MRO needs of the industry. In terms of the defense industry, 46% of the federal public aerospace and defense contracts stem out of Quebec. So there's a lot of opportunities. Some of the key players within the province include Bell, CAE, Lockheed Martin, Pratt Whitney, Canada. So there's a lot of expertise here that can be found within drones, shipping, ground systems, AI, optic photonics, and quantum. If you're looking for opportunities within the space, I just wanted to flag that there's an event coming up in March 2025 called AeroMart, which is going to offer B2B opportunities for you to meet with the companies within the ecosystem. And if there's any interest, you'll be happy to share my contact information, and I'd be happy to connect you with different folks there. Just coming back to the shipyard, the marine industry. So Erin alluded to a strong presence and expertise across Canada. In addition to Davy, which she mentioned, there's also Groupe Océan and Chantier Naval Forillon. Davy specifically has strong expertise around icebreakers. So I know that there's been discussions of potentially a partnership between the U.S. and Finland and Canada around what will be called the Ice Pact, and we expect a lot of opportunities in this space for both U.S. companies. Specifically in terms of the expertise that you will find in Quebec related to the maritime sector, it runs the gamut from the engineering design, the assemblage, etc. So we can definitely connect you with the right folks. And just some recent news that came out of Canada, obviously with Davy, there was an 8.5 billion agreement established for building 7 icebreakers, 1 polar icebreaker for the Canadian Coast Guard and 2 interprovincial ferries for Transport Canada. And then also a news announced earlier this year about Canada wanting to acquire 12 conventionally powered submarines. And so I'm sure that there's going to be lots of opportunity here to leverage the expertise that can be found in the US to build these craft. So that's the end on my part, and I will pass the baton over to my friends at the Canadian Commercial Corporation, Suzanne Wilkinson, who can talk specifically about how U.S. companies can collaborate and partner with Canada.
Thanks, David. Excuse me, I'm going to share my presentation. Yep. I hope folks can see that. Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thanks to Molly and the SENEDIA team for inviting me to do this tech talk. Thanks to my colleagues who have gone before me, Erin and David, in regards to setting the table in regards to what Canada has to offer, and now how do we make this all work? right? So just going to go through some things about my organization and how we work collaboratively with DoD. So who we are Canada's Foreign Military Sales Agency. So think of us as your DSCA, Defense Security Corporation Agency. We do all gov-to-gov agreements between Canada and other allied partners across the globe. And we have a unique relationship with the US that is anchored in the Defense Production Sharing Agreement. And the objective of that agreement, which I want to take from this slide, is to sustain a strong Canada-US relationship, right? And it's basically on the defense sector level and how we can work together more very collaboratively on defense and security between the two countries. So the three key things about our organization. So we are the conduit for the North American defense industrial base, right? A strong North American industrial base. We're governed, as I said, by the Defense Production Sharing Agreement, which has been around since 1956, and that we are specifically called out in the Federal Acquisition Regulation and the DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations in Section 225.870 that talks about contracting with Canada. Last year, we signed $1.1 billion of contracts with DoD. And at the same time, we were delivering close to about the same, about 870 million on existing contracts to DoD. The breakdown is here as to how that applies. We've done a lot with Army. Armies are our biggest partner. Then we have the Navy, DLA, and then the Air Force. And our work with Army is just by virtue of what's going on globally. And we've seen Army priorities being at the top of the list of where they're looking to bolster the supply chain. This is just a high level of who our senior leadership is, and I should have made this very clear at the start. It says Canadian Commercial Corporation. We are neither commercial or corporation. We are a Government of Canada agency. I know people see those words and think we're some type of public entity or some type of corporation. We are not. We're agency of the Government of Canada. Our senior leader is Bobby Kwan, who's our president and CEO, and then we have 4 vice presidents that manage various aspects of the business, and I report into the Vice President for Contract Management and Operations. So this is our services. So we have what's called the Global Bid Opportunity Finder. So it's where we host all the requirements that are coming internally from Canada. So we have our own version of SAM.gov. So we pull from SAM.gov, we pull from our own internal Canada buys requirement, and we pull from international sites such as from NATO, and we just bring them and host them in one place so Canadian suppliers could just have a one-stop shop if they're looking to engage more broadly than just in the Canadian market. We also have an advisory service. To Erin's point, we do some complementary work with Canadians who are saying, okay, I'm thinking I want to expand and tap into the US market. How do I go about that? So there's some complementary services there that we work with Erin in regards to advisory service. And then the 2 key programs that we run, so the DoD Defense Production Sharing Agreement, which is a funded agreement by the government of Canada. So it's an appropriated program that the government commits to on a yearly basis from a policy perspective. And then we have the international prime contractors. So that's everybody else than the US that works those government to government, and is more broader. It's broader. So on the international side, they could do infrastructure, they could do grains, they could do everything in addition to defense. For the agreement that we have is strictly related to defense and security. So again, I set the basis of the agreement, and the objective of the agreement is 3 things, which is to bring US DoD and Canadian suppliers together, to guarantee the credibility and the performance of Canadian suppliers, and to do the provision of pre and post. So again, we are a contracting entity, so we do provide some of the contracting pre and post services, and I'll get into that a little bit deeper. But if I have any contracting folks on the line, you're mostly familiar with DCMA and DCAA. So we do take on some of that roles through the agreement to do those, provide some of those services through Government of Canada entities. Here are the supporting legislative and bilateral agreements. As I talked about, the DFARS 225.870 talks about contracting with Canadian suppliers, but it also goes and talks about that the purchase shall be made through CCC. So folks are always wondering, why do I have to use CCC? This is the regulation that says, working with Canadians, you shall do it through CCC. And I will add that the threshold is for 250,000, because it goes back in a deeper. It says what's the threshold? It's $250,000, but we can still provide support and advice for things under that. Another part that is not also readily shared amongst folks is that Canada is part of the definition of domestic industrial base and the domestic source. So that's in 50 UC 4552. Part 7, and that DOD, again, position from a policy position has always considered Canada to be part of the domestic source. And so Title III, Canada is considered a part of domestic source for Title III funding as well. Again, we have a couple of other overarching. So we have a reciprocal defense agreement that lays out what entities within the Government of Canada. So you'll hear about CCC, you'll hear about Department of National Defence, and you'll hear about Public Service and Procurement Canada. And these are the 3 entities that are mandated under the agreements of how we support DOD in certain aspects when it comes to contracting. And then we have the reciprocal security arrangement that, again, is the framework of, okay, if we're going to be considered domestic and we're integrated of this industrial base, how do we treat security bilaterally? And so there's an agreement, and I'll get into that of how that works. There's also, so I'm talking about the broader acquisition piece, but there is also a defense development sharing agreement. So again, as much as Canada and US, we buy from each other through acquisition, there's also some suggestions based on this agreement that was signed way back when in 1950 or 1960s was the last updated version, that Canada and US would also look to collaborate in the R&D space. I know this agreement hasn't been taken fully advantage of, again, because I don't think folks truly understand that this exists and there's opportunity to partner with Canada when it comes to R&D. So this is something that have been revitalized as to, okay, how can Canada and US leverage this to look at things that jointly. So that's a conversation that's happening. So this is how the role of CCC, so we're in the middle, and then as we talked about, there's a gov-to-gov contract with DOD, and then on the back end, again, just like how DOD would do it if they were contracting on behalf of Canada, then DOD would have a domestic contract with their suppliers the same. We have an agreement with DOD, whichever service across DOD, and then we have a domestic contract where this is flowed down with our Canadian industry partners. But we also enable the conversation and the discussion from a technical aspect between our industry partners and the DOD. So no one's ever felt left out. It's a tri-party agreement that we're all working collaboratively together to ensure that the goods and services are delivered on time and with budget. Again, our oversight, where we're part of the conversation, it reduces the risk, and we can have those conversations from a gov to gov if there are things that are happening that, hey, Canada, I need you to pay attention more on this part of the contract and the delivery and execution of the contract. So we're all together on this. There's no one person that's in charge. We're all together in charge. This is just our contracting process from beginning. So it talks about our industry. Our industry have work to do. So they have to go out, again, doing their own business development, engagement across the ecosystem of what might be of interest, what they're hearing might be coming down the pike, responding to markets survey, RFIs, those kind of things. And so going through that process enables my organization to have the early indication of where the interest is and what we're seeing and whether or not there are any barriers for competition, right? So one of the big things that we hear all the time from our industry is the use of the no foreign, right? And sometimes we can catch it in time with and talk to our U.S. colleagues to say, hey, no foreign wouldn't apply to Canada. Or if you are saying no foreign, what's the justification? Sometimes it's way too late because they're already down a path. So we're doing better to have these conversations during the market research opportunities and through RFIs, so we don't see those published in RFP solicitation. Again, because the Government of Canada is going to be the executor who's going to sign up and attest to our partners delivering on these contracts, there is a due diligence process that we also have to do internally to make sure that we want to attach our name and be partners with our industry. So there's a due diligence process that we go through to make sure that they're technically capable, they're financially solvent, all the things, that they could deliver similarly requirements if Government of Canada was asking for that. So there's a due diligence process that we go through to enable Canadian industry to work through the DPSA. And once that is done, then we support their response to whatever solicitation that they're working on, and we'll advise, the contracting officer to just let them know, hey, this is a Canadian in the mix, but we want you to know the Government of Canada will step in once you've done your down select. So it's very clear that this will end up being a gov-to-gov situation. And then because when it becomes gov-to-gov, then some of the contracting regulations from the FARs and DFARS don't apply. So it's good to give that heads up. So when we get into the negotiation piece, it's not a surprise that we're going that way. And then, we talk about contract negotiation, but it's really about, now that it's a gov to gov, what are the FARs and the DFARS are applicable and which ones are not? And then we're all good and we sign and we deliver on the contract, and then we do this all over again. So I'm going to talk about, because I think this is the part that folks are truly interested in, what I've heard of not understanding sharing of technical data package or information that may be considered CUI. So I'm going to go through some of the programs that Canada have had to put into place to meet some of the DoD requirements to, again, have this whole integrated approach to working collaboratively for North America. So there is a Canada-US Reciprocal Industrial Security Agreement. It's been in accordance since 1985 and is part of the DFARS of doing business with Canada. I can tell you right now, it's been reviewed and it's been not renegotiated, but refreshed in regards to where we are, what we're seeing in our ecosystem, because security is evolving. So that discussion is underway. It is led by our Public Service and Procurement Canada, who is the Government of Canada's designated security authority. Canada also has ITAR exemptions in 126.5. And while I'm not going to get into the meat of this, it's good to understand that these exemptions exist because the subsequent slides I will share is the reasons why this ITAR exemption is in place, right? So it's the use of how we, Government of Canada, with our industry, is going to make sure that we safely handle and secure information that is shared with us. So firstly, there's the DD 2345, which is the Joint Certification Program. So again, that goes to ensuring that Canada-US is integrated. So this office, the Joint Certification Program Office, is is staffed by both Canada and US, right? It's an office that Canada and US folks are public service and procurement folks. As I said, they're the security agency for Government Canada sits in this office, and they're the ones who take in the Canada request, and they go through the preliminary review of Canadian industry. So that's an indication that there was always this intent for Canada and US to share information. Then there's the Controlled Goods Program, and this is Canada's answer to the ITAR exemption that's in 126.5. So by virtue of having that exemption, we had to create what is called the Controlled Goods Program. And the Controlled Goods Program really lays out the requirements for industry to meet in order to obtain information not only from Canada, but from foreign governments and allied partners. There is a registration and compliance issue requirement, and there's a training and awareness. And it gets updated. It's not perpetual, so it's for finite time and they get reviewed again. So any Canadian company that's working in defense and security must be registered in the Controlled Goods Program, because that's a requirement for Government of Canada to address the ITAR exemption. Then we have what's called the Contract Security Program. And so this is where we're getting out of CUI or on-class into the classified side. Again, we had to create this Contract Security Program, and here it talks about the equivalencies. So you guys don't have what's called reliability. That's what we use for what's like on-class or classified CUI, because CUI is not something that we use in our vernacular, but that's what that is. Then there's the confidential, which we have. There's the secret, and then there's top secret, and then on the top secret, there's all the compartmental pieces that, again, what we call certain things, you guys don't call. So it's always the aligning of what's the intent of, or what's the definition of these, even though we don't call them the same thing. So that's Canada's approach, again, just to meet in some of the US DoD requirements to enable the DPSA program. The other piece I'm going to leave with you, because it's still not, it's still evolving. So you guys, DoD has, and the final rule was issued in regards to CMMC. Canada program is being developed for, it's called the Canadian Program for Cybersecurity Certification Level. So again, it demonstrates that we're always aligning with the shifts that we're seeing in the US when it comes to security and how we handle it. There is a broader dialogue of whether or not CMMC and CPCSC will end up having a reciprocity. We're not there yet because we're still just building out our program. But just wanted to share that we're developing our own CMMC version, and it's going to align again with how the US program will be. So we're going to have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. It's going to be based on the NIST Rev 3, and there's further announcements that are going to come. But what I can share with you is that we're going to start our level 1 in January. We're going to start rolling this out. So in January 2025, we're going to start our level 1 assessment and phase that in. And we're going to be working with our Department of National Defense for contract selection. And then we're going to start building our accreditation ecosystem. I can tell you that this week, since the final rule has been published and we've been working our system, we, DoD CIO and ourselves are starting to have a bit more dialogue on how our programs can be aligned and how we see ourselves integrating the industrial base, to making sure that if they have a CPCSC that is equivalent to the US version, if they have a CMMC, it's equivalent to the Canada version. So a lot of dialogue going on, but again, it just demonstrates that we're so integrated that whatever program changes, that we also have to be aligned on that. And this is just a high-level timeline of the CPC for the pilot phase, which is level 1, and then when we'll do level 2, and when we will mark the full implementation of CPSC, which is fall 2025. So unlike the DoD, we don't have a rule-making process. We have a policy-making process, and we have some opportunity to test how we see this working with industry and get the feedback and just continue to evolve the program so that it ends up giving us what we want it to do. This is just examples of a couple of files that we have worked on. As I said, Army has been our, just by virtue of what's happening across the world, our number one key stakeholder for the past year and a half. We've been doing a lot of work on ammunition with them. We've sought some waivers on policy and legislative that have been on the books that they were able to waive to enable us to, get our industry up and ready to support some of these requirements. We've done some Air Force stuff. We've done some classified stuff. Again, we've done a different, so this is just a bit of some of the work we've done across all the services. And you can see some of them are really big things. And then you see we bought gloves and ventilators and snow blowers. So it just gives you a perspective of what we're able to contribute to the ecosystem. And then just some myth busters. I always like to leave with this. So again, Canada is considered part of the domestic industrial base. Can't say that loud enough. Contracting with Canada is part of the DFARS. It's there. We're one of the only countries, I like to say that's written into your DFARS about this. And again, a Canadian supplier is not required to have an American presence to sell to DoD. It's something, again, we hear from our industry that they're told, well, you need to have a Canadian, US, they don't. If they do, it's by virtue of a business decision, but there's no legislative mandatory requirements for them to do that. And then the key takeaways from today's presentation is that our service is free, as I said at the top. It's an appropriation. It's appropriation from our government because of public policy. It is something good for Canada and US and the defense of North America. It's how we both benefit from our both industrial base. So as much as Canada buys from the US through their FMS system, the US commits, to buy from Canada from our suppliers. There are no added steps or complexity in the gov-to-gov strategy. It's just now your contract is with the government of Canada and not the supplier, and some of the FARs and DFARs that would normally apply would not apply because these are gov-to-gov contracts. Again, the assurance you're getting doing gov-to-gov contracts is that we're assessing the supplier's capability, and the government of Canada is providing an assurance that the Canadian supplier can deliver the technical and the financial aspect of it. And again, time is of essence, reasonability, is the price fair and reasonable? That's all the pieces that we also provide to DoD in that regards. And so that is the end of my presentation. And I know maybe I've gone a bit too fast, but I'm happy. There are probably lots of questions out there, but happy to take any questions or happy to delve into any areas that you're really looking for additional clarification.
Suzanne, thank you so much. Really gave us an insight into how it works to do business with Canada and the important partnership. Folks, if you have any questions, the chat function is probably the most easiest way to do that. So feel free to throw some questions in there. I will be sharing the presentations. I will be sharing the presentation, the actual video, but you got to give me a little bit of time on that because I'm going to have to get it and cut it and all that bit. But any questions out there from folks? I'm sure there are, and I'm also sure that since you all have given us your contact information, some of our companies and folks will be following up with you directly.
Suzanne, while we're waiting, you talked a lot about gov-to-gov, but I actually hear from local industry quite a bit questions about working with Canadian subcontractors and whether or not they're allowed to. And is that something you can maybe talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so the rules and how the programs, so all the programs that I've just talked about, Public Service and Procurement Canada handles that for everybody, for both the government side and the industrial side. So those agreements doesn't necessarily say, oh, it's just for the government and not for industry. It applies. It's who takes the lead in applying those and how it gets applied is the same. So for industry who's looking to get into working with a supplier, that's Public Services and Procurement Canada. They would handle all the aspect of doing the verification of, are they in the controlled goods program? Do they have a DD 2345? Have they done stuff for Canada before? Like just going through the checkbox of what they would do if that supplier was going to directly work on the Canadian requirements. So yes, they still can, and the government will still provide that assurance. It just won't come from CCC. It comes from PSPC, who provides the industrial, because PSPC handles what's called the Industrial Security Program. So they know what's happening with our industry, who's meeting what requirements, and can speak to that. And I didn't include it in this presentation, but there is a process where that validation is done, and it's really somebody just sending an email to our PSPC saying, hey, this Canadian company wants to be in the supply chain or work with us. Can you provide us that assurance? And then they'll do their research, talk to the company, and then do that. But all the tools that we have enabled from a bilateral applies both directly and indirectly.
I'll just jump in and mention, when I put my Undersea Technology Innovation Consortium hat on, we're the consortium for the other transaction agreement that the Navy has for undersea technology. And while the rules right now state that to be a member of the consortium, you do have to be a U.S. company, our companies can subcontract with Canadian companies for any prototype proposals that they put in. So again, another avenue where we can partner.
Exactly.
Something I just want to add is, if, obviously there's a big trend of nearshoring or friendshoring. And if your company is actively looking for suppliers that can help you with, a widget or technology, really, Erin and I are here to support you. And all we really need to know is, what you're looking for, what type of certification requirements that you may have. And then what we will do is essentially serve as a scout or a matchmaker and see who within our respective ecosystems have the capabilities that could meet your needs. Come back to you with a bunch of decks for you to look through. And then you would just come back to us and say, yeah, we're interested to meet with company 1, 5, and 7. And we will set up the introductions. So think of us as a complementary headhunter for your company, and that's sort of the role that Erin and I play, and we look forward to supporting you.
And just maybe to elaborate on that, Suzanne alluded to DD 2345 and Canadian controlled goods. And if you say, companies need to have those certifications, we can even filter out based on that. And we can also keep your information confidential. So we don't have to say who we're asking on behalf of.
And we do have some comments coming in. Can you comment on the level of added effort required for U.S. R&D bid, e.g. DARPA, to pull together the right information to support Canadian subcontractors in our prime bid?
Okay, so that's twofold. So we've been working, so this twofold, I'm going to answer that question. So we've been working directly with DARPA, because DARPA is uniquely integrated with our Defense Research Development Canada, DRDC. So they're the equivalent, and they've done a lot of work. And so one of the things that we've been doing is making sure that DARPA considers our industrial base too. So there've been some work with DARPA that has come to Canada to educate and to get our industry, say, hey, there are DARPA opportunities that you should, apply on. And what we've heard from DARPA is that, again, they're not limiting any participation by allied partners and countries, whether in like a prime or whether into the subcontract. So I'm not sure if that's what you're alluding to, but my understanding, what we've seen, there hasn't been anything that says no foreign or only US or that type of language. Because it's a conversation we've had over the past year of opening the aperture to include Canadians, because by virtue of all the work they're doing with our defense research entities, and I think Erin pointed out, and all the stuff that's going to be happening with NATO, Diana, that's in Halifax. It's like, okay, we can't have these barriers. So so far I'm understanding that companies are seeing a more openness to include Canadians into consideration. So I hope that answers that question, but if not, follow up with me.
There's another question here. Is there a formal program sponsored by the Canadian government to mitigate counterfeit part risks that establishes standards for the Canadian suppliers?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we have a formal program, but it's part of our procurement or acquisition process of how we do it. So again, we're a bit on the smaller side, so we don't have official programs. It's just embedded in part of our acquisition process. And honestly, we take our best. We take like what the US is doing, what UK is doing, and we kind of come up with the Canadian version of it. So it is implemented in our acquisition process. We just don't have a dedicated programs for that. And when we do Gov to Gov, as I said, our Public Service and Procurement Canada folks, who are the ones who the expertise lays with them, because they are the ones who actually signed Government of Canada contracts. So we invoke them to do that inspection and assessment for us on behalf of DoD to make sure that doesn't happen for our DoD. So as I said, it's embedded, it's there, it's just getting their expertise and applying them to DoD contracts and not just the Canadian contracts.
And it looks like we have one more question. Can CCC authorities and processes handle classified requirements from the US DoD?
Yes, we can. I think I have 2 instances where DoD passed technical data package to us to give to industry. So yes, that's why there's that Gov to Gov agreement. We can take it and hand it over to our industry folks. So, yep.
Okay, last call for questions. And again, you're leaving this meeting with contact information for Suzanne, Erin, and David. You'll get the package. And I really think that this has been unbelievably useful for me to understand the whole environment, how it works, the insights on how to make it happen. But again, to have 3 contacts is very, very helpful.
Yep.
So seeing nobody else has a question, any comments from our presenters? Any final comments? All right, looks like we're all set. Again, thank you to everybody for joining us, and thank you especially to Suzanne, Erin, and David. This was very, very helpful, and I think that the information we get from this Tech Talk and the follow-on will help promote, again, the intersection and the partnership between our 2 countries. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.